joining us today for Bsi Betsy. I am Alexis Lawrence. I am the adult service librarian here, and this is the fifth in our book sandwich and series. And I am happy to have Bsi Russell here, the founder of Ontario Pathways, and she will be discussing two of Dr. Doug Tallamy's books, the Nature's Best Hope and Nature of Hope today. And I am going to turn this over to Betsy to get started. There are snacks in the back as well. Those are compliments of the Centerville Homemakers. And so feel free to grab those as well. And I will turn it over to Betsy to get started. Thank you.
This is a lot for me to juggle up here. Thank you for coming out on such a nice day. Too nice to be inside, I know. I'm Betsy, and my husband, Greg, is over there. Can you wave? In the back row. And we live just a stone's throw from this library, and we have lived in Canandaigua for 42 years. Greg is from Appleton, Wisconsin, and I am from Dunkirk, New York. And if you will bear with me for just a moment, I would like to explain, can you hear me all right? I would like to explain how I got here today. I grew up on the shore of Lake Erie. My childhood was spent outdoors like so many people of my generation. And that's where I wanted to be. It didn't matter the season. I had miles of shoreline, acres of woods, streams going down into the lake and the lake itself to explore. I adored collecting insects, and I loved the spring wildflowers, always looking through the woods to see what they were. When I graduated from nursing school at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, my first job was at the University Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. And that is where I met Greg. And that's also where I was introduced to the wonderful world of Rails to Trails. Wisconsin was the leader in the country in Rails to Trails. We eventually moved back to New York, and were lucky enough to land in Canandaigua. Greg taught history at Calmac, and I worked in the psychiatric ICU at the VA. So one of the first things that I did when I moved here was to join the Botanical Society, which, by the way, is 150 years old this year, which is quite a record. I also took a wonderful adult education class, Wildflower ID, from Dr. Bruce Gilman, who's sitting in the back, and is an extraordinary botanist and a local treasure. I used to routinely drive Greg crazy, asking him to turn the car around so I could go back and have a closer look at something that I saw flowering by the roadside. It was a bone of contention. When our children were old enough to ride their own bikes, we looked for a rail trail like those we had enjoyed in Wisconsin. The closest we found was the Outlet Trail in Penn Yan, and one day we spent a wonderful day exploring that trail and wishing there was something closer to Canandaigua like that. And that's how Ontario Pathways was born. Some of the volunteers I cleared trail with for many years were also avid birders. They inspired me to take up birding. I was again transported by nature's beauty and amazed to be seeing and hearing birds that had been around me all my life, but of which I had been totally unaware. After 15 years of birding, it was sadly becoming evident to all of us that we were not seeing the numbers or variety of birds that we used to see, and that their nesting habitats were becoming seriously degraded by invasive plants. One day I was discussing that very subject with a birding friend when she asked me, "Have you ever heard of Doug Tallamy?" And that's how I got here today. I'm someone who has always enjoyed the outdoors and considered myself a nature person. Yet until I read Doug Tallamy's books, I didn't know how little I knew about how nature really works. Doug Tallamy is an entomologist. He's taught for over 40 years at the University of Delaware in the School of Agriculture. He is a researcher with over 100 research papers to his name. He is the author of several books, 2 here today, and he lectures all across the country. He co-founded a nonprofit called Homegrown National Park, which is a wonderful online resource and completely free. He is without a doubt the leading voice of the native plant movement in this country. And this is a little odd thing to say at a book review, but during the pandemic, I got absolutely hooked on watching his videos on YouTube. And I highly recommend it. If you're not particularly a science person or a nature person, watching those 1-hour videos is a wonderful way to inspire you to read these books, for example. Dr. Tallamy does not shy away from telling us the bad news, of which you have probably seen many headlines recently. For instance, the insect apocalypse. They estimate that insect populations are down 50% globally. 3 billion birds in North America have been lost in the past 50 years. Earth has lost 2/3 of its wildlife since 1970. Those are all well within my lifetime. Every 30 seconds, a football field worth of America's natural areas disappear to development. But the good news is that there is something that we can do about it right in our own backyards. But the reality is that most people will never do what needs to be done unless they understand why it is so important to their own species. He wrote these books to empower people, not to depress them. His writing is meant to educate, intrigue, and inspire people to act. And while he is doing that, he is also entertaining us with some truly remarkable tales about how Mother Nature really works. And Bruce, if I'm saying anything wrong here, just pipe right up. Please. He often uses examples of events in nature which we are totally unaware of, yet are happening all around us, right underneath our feet, right over our heads, and right in front of our faces, but we rarely see them. These are interactions between plants and animals, and that includes insects, that are integral parts of how soil is made, air is cleaned, water is filtered, and how, in fact, we are able to exist on this planet. These events are all part of how an ecosystem works. They have often taken many thousands of years to evolve or more, and yet humans have managed to disrupt so many of these interactions in so many places on the globe that it imperils all living things. Like I said before, he does not belabor the bad news. He spends almost all of his time getting us really excited about the fact that we have an important and positive role to play and nudging us in that direction. And he's a nudger. He doesn't hit you over the head with things, and he gives you lots of options. Way too many to discuss here today. But just to clarify, and Bruce, like I said, if I'm a native plant is a plant that is growing where it evolved. And you could say that no matter where you were. And an introduced plant evolved somewhere else. And for us in the Finger Lakes, that could have been Asia, it could have been South America, it could have been Europe. Introduced plants were brought here oftentimes by accident, but more often on purpose. Introduced plants are not bad or evil, and no one is bad for planting them. Introduced plants Plants that are not native can be either relatively benign or aggressive, quite aggressive, or what we would call invasive. What makes them aggressive or invasive is their lack of natural enemies and their ability to outcompete our native plants. A good example of that, and one which surprised me, is the Bradford pear. Bradford pears are beautiful trees. They flower copiously in the spring. They're planted all in front of Wegmans and TJ Maxx Plaza and lots and lots of places. They're gorgeous in the fall. They grow fast. What's not to like? But the thing is that they don't stay where they're planted. And you will start to see now in the spring white flowering trees that are little Bradford pears coming up all over the place. And in some places, I don't know about here yet, but they have banned selling them and have even actually started paying people to remove them. That's how invasive they are. And there are so many examples. In Nature's Best Hope, the main idea is that we need a new approach to conservation, and it begins in our own yards. Why does it have to begin in our own yards when we have so many natural areas? But the fact is that our natural areas, including our federal parks, our national parks, our state parks, all our land trust areas, they're all too small and too isolated from one another to support healthy, functioning ecosystems. And the declining numbers in so many species around the globe is a testament to that. So, he gives us statistics, and by the way, he references everything he's talking about. So if you have questions, you can just go to the back of that book and check out those references. East of the Mississippi in the United States, 85% of the land mass is in private ownership. So, and that is about 78% in the entire United States is in private ownership. But he is arguing that there are lots of places within that privately owned land where native plants can be restored. He's in particular talking to residential homeowners in this book, in these books, but he's also arguing that in airports, golf courses, many places there are places where native plants can be restored and not interfere with agriculture or whatever it's being used for. So the main ideas that he puts forth for doing this, one is to shrink your lawn, two is to get rid of the invasives on your property, three, to plant some native plants, four, to leave your leaves, and five, to address outdoor lighting. The lawn, he doesn't have very nice things to say about lawns. He calls them biological wastelands or ecological deadscape, and the absolute worst plant choice for sequestering carbon. It ruins watersheds because everybody wants their lawn to look nice and not have weeds, and all that stuff eventually finds its way into the watershed. He says to think of your lawn as area rugs, not wall-to-wall carpeting. He's not advising people to get rid, he's too smart for that. He knows that that's never going to happen. But to shrink your lawn by half, that's the goal. Getting rid of invasives, and I know in my own yard, I have spent many years getting rid of the garlic mustard, and now getting rid of invasives is like it's just like a annual chore, you know. They keep coming back. The seeds that they spread can last a very long time in the soil and keep coming back, and that's what they do. So until you tackle that long enough to get them before they go to seed, you will eventually win, but you still have to keep at it. Okay, so getting rid of invasives, planting natives, and he teaches us that all native plants are not equal in supporting biodiversity. They all have a place, and they all have a place in a healthy functioning ecosystem. But some plants are much better at supporting biodiversity than others, and those plants he calls keystone plants. And he wants people to focus on those because we need to. We need to hurry up. Leaving your leaves, I'll talk about in a little bit. Outdoor lighting, they've discovered that outdoor lighting is a very big problem in insect decline. It incinerates insects, it dehydrates them, it blinds them, it disorients them, it makes them easy prey. And it's a very easy problem for especially homeowners to solve. He advocates yellow LED lights as being the safest for insects. Just switching out your light bulbs. Instead of having a light, a security light that shines brightly all night and the light goes everywhere, think about putting a motion light in there instead, or putting a hooded light that shines where you need it to shine and doesn't scatter the light. Those are all good and easy options. So, the basis to understanding why we should do any of these things, though, is to understand what an ecosystem is and how it functions. Ecosystems are local. A healthy functioning ecosystem here is not the same as it would be in southern Florida or in the Southwest. You get the idea. But healthy functioning ecosystems do so many things that are absolutely essential to life on Earth. Cleaning the soil, creating healthy soil, filtering water, sequestering carbon, and helping to prevent flooding, and many more things. But native plants, so native plants are the ground layer of any healthy functioning ecosystem. And the insects that feed off those plants are what make everything else up the food chain possible, including us. He teaches us throughout these books, in the words of E.O. Wilson, who was an even more famous entomologist than he is, insects are the little things that run the world. And he was not making a figurative statement. He meant that literally. Insects are the little things that run the world. Insects cannot survive without the plants with which they have co-evolved. The plants they can survive on are oftentimes very specific. And the example that most people know is the monarch and the milkweed. Much of Dr. Ptolemy's research, along with others, is that caterpillars transfer more energy from plants to other species going up the food chain than any other plant eater worldwide. Caterpillars turn into moths and butterflies, and they are nutritional powerhouses of fat and protein. For every species of butterfly, however, there are 19 species of moths. Yet butterflies are usually the things we focus on because they're beautiful and they fly around during the day and we can see them. Moths are mostly nocturnal, and even though there are some gorgeous moths like the green Luna moth and the Cecropia, a lot of moths are quite small and drab looking, and because they are nocturnal, we pay them little attention. interesting, again, is that they have discovered that birds prefer moth caterpillars over butterfly caterpillars. Not sure how they figured that out, but the bottom line here is that moths are driving the food webs that birds eat. A pair of chickadees needs between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to raise one brood of chicks until they're out of the nest. And beyond that, the adults continue to feed those young caterpillars for another few weeks. So they need thousands upon thousands of caterpillars to make one successful brood of chicks. And this isn't true for just chickadees. It's true for almost all perching birds, which are all the birds you can think of and many that you have no idea are there. And none of that can happen without the native plants on which the insects depend. But as I mentioned before, all native plants aren't equal. Some are much better at supporting biodiversity than those, and those are referred to as keystone plants. And that's where the nature of oaks come in. He wrote this book because oaks are by far the top of the line when it comes to supporting biodiversity. Oaks can live hundreds of years if left undisturbed. They support more species of moths and butterfly caterpillars than any other native plant in North America, well over 500. They have the greatest geographic range of any tree in the Northern Hemisphere. We have about 90 species of oaks in the U.S., and I think there are a little over 600, he said, worldwide. Unlike most trees, they hold on to their leaves most of the winter, and a healthy, mature oak can have up to 700,000 leaves in its canopy, and they produce upwards of 3 million acorns in their lifetime. Think of the animals that supports. So he divides the nature of oaks month by month, telling you what's happening with the oak tree in each month. For example, and I just picked out one little example to talk to you about for the month of January. Golden crowned kinglets, tiny little birds smaller than chickadees, live here and can survive here during our winters. I know this winter hasn't been bad, but some of our winters are really bad. And they do it eating only insects. How does that happen? Well, a lot of caterpillars will overwinter in the crevices of trees. And some caterpillars even pretend they're twigs, and they will attach themselves to a branch. And he's got a couple pictures in this book, and you cannot tell if it's a caterpillar or a twig. And the reason they can do that is their little bodies have glycerin in them, the same thing that's in our car antifreeze. So they can survive the winter that way and thaw out in the spring and complete their life cycle. And it isn't just the golden crowned kinglet, but chickadees in the wintertime, 50% of their diet is insects, not just the seeds we're feeding them in our feeders. Same is true for brown creepers and woodpeckers. So, okay, where am I? Okay. In February, since February is kind of a quiet month, even for trees, he spends February debunking a lot of misconceptions people have about oak trees and why they don't want them in their yards. They're too big, our yard's too small, they're too expensive to plant, they take too long to grow, they're too messy, on and on. I won't won't tell you his counter-arguments, but he has them. In March, he talks about oak leaf litter. He calls it priceless litter. And I read you a quote. "The diversity and abundance of the little creatures that reside in the leaf litter beneath an oak is astounding and easily exceeds in the millions. A complex community of decomposers and their predators." And he tells us that oak leaf litter is the best for supporting decomposers, using as mulch in your garden, improving water filtration, and much more. And a big part of that reason is because oak leaves last a good 3 years before they decompose. A lot of other leafy trees, their leaves decompose much faster. An interesting little aside, if you want more lightning bugs in your yard, don't rake. Lightning bugs are beetles, and they need leaf litter to complete their life cycles. Some caterpillars roll themselves up in the leaf litter for winter and to hide from predators and complete their life cycles there. So if we rake all this away and chop it up or send it to the city compost, that's not going to happen. In June, he talks about everything you would want to know about cicadas in less than 3 pages, and it is fascinating, I want to tell you. I didn't even know that there were annual and perennial cicadas. And there's a big cicada emergence going on in the Midwest this summer that is quite unique, and if you have a chance, read about it, and then read these 3 pages. In August, again, he talks about the very important ecosystem services, that a healthy, well-functioning ecosystem helps filter our water, clean our air, pollinate, store carbon, mitigate flooding, creates healthy soils. Oaks in particular are one of the very best at storing carbon because of their massive root system and managing our watersheds because of their large canopies and leaf surfaces. At the back of each of these books, in the back of Nature's Best Hope are quite a few pages of frequently asked questions. It's a great place to even start reading the book. Very helpful. And in the back of this book, he tells you how to plant an oak tree from an acorn, which is the way that he recommends doing it. You will end up, not only is it completely free, but you will end up with a much healthier tree over its lifetime. I think that it would be a wonderful project to do with your children, your grandchildren, and to impart some of the lessons along the way of why it's so important. Okay, so about 3 years ago, we started adding native plants to our yard. I've made lots of mistakes already, and Greg's very good at moving plants around and preparing soil. And we had, this past year, through the Canandaigua Botanical, I met Emily DeBolt, and she actually, one of my biggest objectives of doing this is I want to have a beautiful garden in our front yard that the neighbors will see, and they will, and hopefully they will comment on, and I'll bring them in and show them and catch them that these are native plants, and that you don't have to have a totally wild-looking yard if you want to do this. And so we put it in last fall. We're going to expand it this spring. But these are some of the native plants that we have in our yard now. This is butterfly weed, which is a milkweed. There are about 3 kinds of milkweed in our area. This is one of them, one of the ones that you don't see as often, but it is a beautiful plant. This is Canadian columbine, cinnamon fern, hairy beard tongue, and you can see a bumblebee there with his pollen sacs on both sides of his body. I had never even seen that until last year. I hadn't been looking carefully enough. Dense blazing star, maidenhair fern, and there is the only one monarch that we saw the entire season. Swamp milkweed, with actually that is a non-native bee on there. We have 4,000, I think he said, species of bees in that native bees in our country, and he will debunk the idea that people want to put native plants in, but they don't want any bees because they don't want anybody to be stung. I worked all summer long in our gardens, surrounded by bees. They paid absolutely zero attention to what I was doing. And he says, I'm not recommending that you try this, but he said you can actually pet a bee who's feeding, and they will not do anything. They're much more intent on what they're doing. Thimbleweed, wild geranium. Let's see, how do I go back? Well, anyway, I don't need to. That's it. If you have questions, I probably won't be able to answer them, but you can ask. Yes?
I actually have a comment. Thank you for sharing about moths. I have a little story to share that we look at moths differently now today. I mean, we like feel better about moths. My granddaughter says moths are butterflies that haven't been painted by fairies yet. So that's a good reason to like moths.
Yeah.
Now we even have a better reason.
And of course, you know, we do have invasive moths too, that can be a real problem. Gypsy moths and spotted lanternflies. But we're not talking about those. We're talking about native moths. Okay, so yes.
Are native plants easy to find in the garden store?
Well, you will find them more and more. I have sheets over there of resources, and there's some local resources. When you go to to a commercial nursery, and I've bought several things at commercial nurseries, but it's always best. Okay, let me back up. Just say one thing. One of Dr. Tallamy's efforts is called Native Plant Finder. He has done that in cooperation with the National Wildlife Federation. So if you go, and the link is on that paper, if you go there, you can put in your zip code, and up will come trees, native flowering plants, native grasses specific to your area. It's always best to get what they call straight species, but there are cultivars. I've got some cultivars in my yard that also provide good food, and that's one of Dr. Tallamy's frequently asked questions in the back of this book is about cultivars. So yes, but my advice is to have the botanical name with you when you go, and make sure it coincides with the botanical name of the plant that you're buying. That's kind of a... Yes?
In planting an oak from an acorn to be tall hybridization and how likely it is that that acorn will actually germinate and become an oak?
Absolutely, he talks about that, and he says that you really need to cage your tree for a few years, so that the deer don't take it away. Yeah, he said that's pretty, deer populations are unbalanced, very unbalanced, and they destroy a lot of understory, a lot of native plants, a lot of, yeah. So, you do need to protect them.
Yes, I pulled up the NWF list and it says genius, that would be the, genius.
Do you wanna answer that, Bruce?
Can you repeat the
And
question?
so the question was, I pulled up the NWF list for, it says we're in, Eastern Temperate Forest Ecoregion 8, is that not correct? And it lists, plant genius, so that would be
Yeah, plants are given two names. So the genus refers just to the general name.
oh,
So it would be like oak.
okay.
Okay. And then the species name, that's the more specific name within that group of oaks. So we could have red oak, we could have swampine oak, we could have chestnut oak. And so that's what we call the specific epithet for that scientific binomial for that plant.
So for example, this sunflower might give you a genus name.
Yeah, genus is Helianthus. for the
Right, and
sunflowers.
then that's all it gets, so if I take this list to the, White Oak Nursery, then we'll be able to actually get their
Oh, yeah.
plants.
Yeah, and the person there at the White Oak Nursery is very knowledgeable about the native plants in our area. We do have about 4,000, close to 4,000 plants occurring in New York State, and about 3/4 of them are native plants. The other are the introduced and invasive plants that she was mentioning there today. So there's a looming threat there that you can all do something about that individually with your choices on how you manage your lawn and how you try to reestablish native plants.
Thank you.
Does he give suggestions on how to best manage your lawn if you have a husband that insists on it?
Well, if you have a husband of what?
That assists on managing the lawn, because I hate the idea of the lawn, I would easily reduce it down to half, but, I mean, is there a least ecologically managing way?
How can you,
I
I'm
think-
wondering how she can convince her husband to do it.
Right. Well, I think one of the best ways is to somehow trick him into watching one of Dr. Tallamy's videos, 1 hour video. It's a great place to start, and it's powerful. So,
I mean, I have to talk him out of, a lot of the fertilizers.
yeah, I know. Okay, thank you so much for coming.